Hey, thanks for joining me today. Today we're continuing on with the Langchain series. So in our last video, we showed how to set up Langchain in a Rails application. So if you haven't seen that video, you may want to watch that. The big important step in that is setting up the vector database extension in Postgres so that Langchain can use that. So once we set that up, now we can kind of start integrating more advanced features into the application. So in this application, what I've done is I've set up a background job that functions as an assistant that I send requests to. And that assistant has tools that I can use to inspect the application and interact with it. Um, and it can determine what step it needs to take, which I think is really awesome. So in the past, what I would try to do is I myself would determine the next path forward, or try to extract that from what's happening in the LLM responses. So Langchain kind of does all that for me. So I've set up a background job that um, is the assistant that receives communication from the front end through a controller and then renders those responses back to the front end through Hotwire. So there's no additional JavaScript required, so it's really straightforward in a way, and easy to implement. Uh, and it can happen asynchronously with what you're doing. So pretty exciting. So first, let's kind of start out with the interface. So we just have a little chat window here to the right, and I can ask a question to it. I can say, tell me when Pico PM starts. So I have a project over here called Pico PM. I'm asking when it starts. I'm going to send the message now. It doesn't know what the ID is for this project. It doesn't know a whole lot of things. So I can send a message. And the AI has several tools to use to interact with the application. So I'll send the message. So immediately you see, my message comes across and that's sent to the background job and sent back to the interface. It's running a tool. So there's a tool that it runs to analyze project data to answer a question. And it completes the tool execution and it responds with the data that you want. So um, I can have it change the title. So I can do an update. So update the Pico PM project's title to I love bacon. All right, so now I don't have streaming these projects back on this interface, but I need to add that now. I've added this project assistant, but if I refresh it, you'll see that it says I love bacon now. So it's actually able to update the application, send messages to it. I can say, please compare my projects and tell me which one I should work on first. So, it's pulling in all the projects. So before it used like kind of vector search to figure out which project I was talking about. Now it pulls in all the projects, and now it's comparing the I Love Bacon project and the Homestead project. And then it's saying, it says you should work on the I Love Bacon project as it has an earlier start date compared to the Homestead project. Homestead project AI apocalypse risk mitigation. It's kind of funny given the topic. Um, Additionally, it has a higher fee and margin adder. So it's saying that this project's more profitable and it's slated to start earlier. So I should start focusing on that. So um, I think that's really cool that you can give a agent instructions, and then you can give it a list of tools, and then it can execute those tools, all with Langchain. I'm having it update the interface through Hotwire, so it's very lightweight, very easy to set up. This entire container is just a partial that I can plug pretty much anywhere in my application. So um, let's talk about how that's set up. So we'll jump over to the code. Um, so the first thing that we do, let me resize this. Hopefully you guys can see this. I'll zoom in a little bit. All right, maybe that's too much. Oh, this is probably okay. All right. So first, I just do a standard job, nothing fancy. I'm not using Sidekick or anything. I'm just doing a regular job. I'm passing parameters into it. So the parameters that I'm passing into it are user ID and user request. So the user request is the message that is sent. The user ID I'm using so I know how to broadcast the message back to the appropriate user. Now you don't necessarily need to do that. You just need to broadcast to a channel that the user is listening to. So I just have the user, as soon as they get on the interface page, subscribe to that channel so they get responses. So I look up the user. I set up the tools. So one of the really cool things is you can set up tools or tool definitions that tell the application or tell the agent how to use your application. Or you can give it other predefined tools. You can have it check the weather. You can have it use a calculator, so you can have as many tools as you want. So I'm just defining this tool here, and I'll show you guys how that tool definition works later. The next step is we say, hey, this is the LLM that we're using. We're using OpenAI. We're using the OpenAPI key from the environmental variable. Now we're setting up the assistant. So we're passing in the LLM that we set up earlier. We gave it some instructions about what its role is, how to respond. We've provided the tools. Now you can provide multiple tools. You don't have to do just one. Or you can do none if you just want it to be a chatbot. The next thing is really important. So this is what stitches the front end or the background job back to the front end. So you have these callbacks that you can assign. So when it gets the message back, it can do an action. Now, in this case, I'm filtering the action, but you don't necessarily have to do that. But then you do this turbo stream channel broadcast append to. So any of the broadcast functions you can use, I'm just having it append to the list of messages that are currently out there. And I'm extracting from that message, I'm creating a hash that has a few items in it. I have the role. So it could be like the user that the message is from. It could be the system. It could be a tool message. It could also be a message from the assistant. So I don't pass the message directly. I found that when I did do that, it kind of bombed out. Things weren't happy. So I basically created my own hash with what the contents were that I wanted to interact with. So that's like a big piece of it. So that's not so bad. The next thing is I take the user's request and I add the message. So I'm not sending the message to the agent yet. I'm just adding it in the queue. And then here I'm actually adding some additional information just so the agent knows what company it is. And that helps with some of the calls that it's making. So it has maybe a reduced scope. So not only does it know the user, but it knows the company that the user is a part of or the organization. And that way he's not pulling, or that person's not pulling everything down. They're just pulling down what they need or executing against what they need. So there's a little bit of security in there. Now, I don't think this is the ultimate solution for adding security, probably not. So I'll have to do some digging on how I can really dig into this process that Langchain does so I can apply my own parameters to function calls. So once I figure that out, I'll let you guys know. The final thing that you do to execute the LLM call is, you tell it to run. So there's an add message and run feature, but I'm doing multiple messages to bootstrap this process. And then I'm saying allow auto tool execution. So that means it can use any of the tools that I've provided it without user prompting. Otherwise, it would prompt you to say, hey, do you want me to do this? And it would say yes. So I'm just going to have it go crazy. All right. So one thing that I've added to this, if you notice out here, is I have this tool status message. Now, as the AI agent's using tools, what it's doing is looking at the tool that's being used in those messages, and it's doing a user-friendly it's providing a user-friendly message to be used to pass to the user so they know what's happening. So internally inside this inside the message, these are the identifiers that it uses to determine which tool is being used. So project tool would be the the class, and this is the method that's being executed, and then I have these different titles. So I have it do an update method call potentially. It can retrieve a specific project, so it can call it by the project identifier. Um, it can use the ask function, which is kind of like a LLM analysis of your project data. It's almost like it's asking a question and it can get a text response. Query projects, this is using the similar search functionality that's in Langchain that will search for similar um, projects. So that's where it's using the search keyword. So if I put in like Pico, it could find the Pico PM project. And then the get all projects. So one of the things that I found was that if I were to ask it to compare all my projects, what it would do is it would try to use the ask projects or and then provide no parameters for the search term in a way to get all of them. So I provided an alternate method, and that works better. And it's good to have the scope on here so you don't have it getting all the data in your database. So that's important. So tool called, I just created an array of what tools can be called. So Langchain can call multiple tools in parallel if you have it do that. And so I just have to be prepared to handle an array of tools being called. So I just searched through that. There's pretty big structure in here. So I just check to see if that particular function is being called. So, and then I'm taking all the functions returned and I'm joining it and I'm just returning it. And so that's available to the TurboStream that goes to the client. So that's the background job. That's everything that you need to do to execute tools, to set it up, to send messages back to the client. I think that's pretty easy and straightforward. So the documents for Langchain, I don't think are very clear. I mean, some of the examples like on YouTube, the videos are like not using databases or like really basic, the most simplest thing. So, I'm trying to show this in a real application, then we can do the more basic thing later. All right, so let's look at the tool definition. So this is how our project tool is set up. So the project tool, I put it into a tools directory under the apps folder. I didn't really know what the most appropriate was for that, most appropriate place for that was, and that's where I created that folder and I dropped this file in there. It's a standard class. It doesn't have any inheritance. We just extend Langchain tool definition as the first action. So in that, what you do is you define the different functions. So you're basically defining each functions that is available to the tool. And we'll get into what you do there. And then you also define those functions that you're going to execute, along with an initialize function that takes in an API key. Okay, so let's talk about the define function. So the define function has the ask project. So this should match your method name that you're going to call down below. You have a description now. The description is how the LLM knows what to execute. So this is important. If you're having problems with it calling the wrong thing, you may want to investigate how clear your definition is. Okay. It has a do at the end of that. So it's starting this block. And then we define each property. So these are the inputs that are going into the function. So we're saying, what is the title of that? So this is it's gonna know how to pass that parameter. It's gonna know what type it is and a description of that input. So that's what you do for each of the functions. Now at the end, you can also supply whether or not it's required or not. I'm requiring everything, but you don't have to do that. You just have to add more business logic. So here's an example down below where I'm doing the ask project. So that's the ask function that I talked about in the last video, which is kind of like a LLM query, so to speak, where you can ask it for more information. Now, I'm filtering that data set based off the company ID. So I think this will be more important to kind of scope down the data that the LLM is going to have access to or execute to. Now, I'm trying to insert in the company ID as a message at the end of the request from the user, but I definitely feel like that probably could be bypassed through clever prompts. So, I still feel like I have to investigate further on how to secure that properly, but that's the method that I'm using at the moment. So I'm starting it out like a query. I'm doing the ask. Now, if you haven't seen this before, some of the actually both the ask function and the similarity search function give you the option to return a number of results. So the similarity search query, I think the default is 1, which means that it's only going to return the top most similar result. And so what I wanted to do is actually return a list, because I may want to have a list of similar results, and then they're in a descending order of similarity. So you may have something in your results that doesn't match at all, um, but may still be a relevant result. Okay, so structuring this, you can do a query, you can tag in the ask, you can have the number of records you want to have returned, and then I'm doing two JSON, and then I'm doing accept embedding. Okay, so this is important. So if I jump into the console here and I just do like project.last, what you'll see is you have all these embeddings that are built into your model now that you've run that since you've added the embeddings into it. You've added the PG vector into the model. So that was one of the steps that we did in the last video. So this is used by the LLM, but I don't want to pass this. This is used internally by the ask or the similarity search, but I don't want to pass these all the way to the LLM all the time. That's a lot of data to send back and forth. So I filter these out when I do the JSON conversion. All right. All right, so get all projects. I'm basically just doing a basic query where I'm sending those projects across the wire. Query projects, I'm using that similarity search function and converting it to JSON. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, a retrieve project is a little different. So one of the issues that I ran into was that I use action text. And so that's a rich text record that's not directly stored inside of your model. So if you just take the record and you do to JSON, you're missing whatever your action text is. So actually create a hash on the fly of that record of the fields that I want. And I'll probably get rid of some of these things where I may not want them to have access to it. And then I add in the rich text. So here I'm doing scope project, or I'm returning scope as project scope 2s. So if I just do scope, it just returns a action text object, which it can't really use. So the 2s actually renders the HTML or provides the HTML output from that field, so it can be used. And then I'm passing everything to JSON. So if I just return a hash to this, it just says it can't find what it's looking for. So at first I thought that maybe the Langchain would take care of that, and maybe I'm just doing something wrong, but this is what I did. So I just provided a hash response converted to JSON. Update project. So this is where I'm taking input and I'm updating it. So in this case, I'm only updating a single field. I could add more fields. There's not a lot of fields I wanted it. This is really just a test case of, hey, can I have it do an update if I want it to, right? And so I give it the primary things that I'm looking for and then the title. So if we go back to the job, one of the things that I'm doing is when I find this user, I'm actually passing in the user's company ID as kind of a scoping process. And so that gets passed out through here. So when I do the find for the project I'm looking up, I want to make sure, I didn't want to just do an update all or like just a query. I wanted to pull the record in it, make sure that I pulled it in and it was a project that was owned by that user's company and not some other project. and then I wanted to update the title and then attempt to save it. And then, I'm still trying to fill out what is expected or what the best practices are in this. So I'm just kind of new to this, just like you are, um, which is what should I respond with? What is expected? So I'm just adding the project identifiers. I'm taking the whole hash and I'm just saving to JSON. Okay, so that is the tool definition. So tool definition is just a class that extends Langchain tool definition, and then you have these defined functions, which is how it knows what tools are available to it, and then also those functions themselves, and an initialized function that passes in the API key. So that's the tool and the background job. So that's kind of all the back end piece of it. Now there's one other piece to that, and that is a controller. So it's not a resources style controller. It's just I have a single controller that has a single endpoint for send message, and it accepts a post. And then from that, I am going to perform that background job with the input that I've received. So I'm looking at the current user. So my application sets the current user globally across the application and makes it available to me. Now I have custom authentication that I've written myself, but you could use your own. The Rails authentication library worked very similar to this. Um, and then I'm passing in the current params for that user. Okay. And then here, what I'm doing is I'm responding to a turbo stream. So I actually have my form set up to send a remote true style submission. So it's not doing a formal submission, it's doing a remote submission. And then I'm handling if someone goes to this path in a standard method, I'm just redirecting them back to the company projects path. So, so to reiterate the process, there's a form that sends a message to this send message. It's going to execute the assistant job. It's going to run it for the user because we have redirect unless logged in, right? It's going to take their user request and pass it to the background job. And then I'm going to respond with the turbo stream. So the turbo stream is, I'm just going to replace the message form for that message with a partial that I have. So the interface is set up with a partial for the input interface, and then I'm just going to replace that. Now, I'm probably going to add some more TurboStreams functions to this to set up like a loading, some sort of loading interface that kind of shows that it's still working until it's finally replaced. And then I'll replace that when the last message has been received. And there's ways to determine what the last message is from the LLM. And I'll go into that, not in this video, but in another video in the future. All right. So this is the turbo stream that sends the message. Now the form for sending this to the assistant controller send message function, just form with URL, and then I'm doing the remote true and method post. And then I just have, a simple form text field, with a placeholder, ask me anything, and then they click the submit button. So this is really straightforward. So this is all you need. Okay, so that sets up the form interface for submittal. All right. So, so if we go to the assistant interface, so this is like, the assistant interface is the entirety of this block right here, right? So if we just start out, this is the entirety of the assistant interface. And what I've done is I have just the header part of it that has like the styling on it, and puts it into a box or into a rounded corner box. And then I do this subscribe. So I'm subscribing to a channel. So this turbo stream from current user basically subscribes me to that channel, and that's where that message is going to come through from the background job. So this is important. If you didn't do this piece, you could do all the messages from the backend and you would never get them. So it's important to have this secret sauce in a way here. And the next thing is I'm running a partial for all the messages. So Right now, there are no messages. I don't have a database backend to store the messages right now. That will be another iteration, and we'll add those later. I just wanted to make this as simple as I could, if that's possible. And then here I have my message form. So we'll look at the the messages partial here next. So in the messages partial, we have some styling, and I'm just basically bootstrapping the interface that has these two messages that weren't really sent. These are placeholder messages. I'm really just trying to prompt the user and say, hey, this is what you can do, without having the assistant send the first message. I could have the assistant send a message to the user, but I'm just preloading it. Yeah, it's unnecessary tokens being used. Um, so then I iterate through the messages. Now I don't render all the messages, like render messages. I just didn't do that, but that's another way to do it. Um, on the message interface, what I'm doing here, so the messages that come across out of the tool, and you'll learn this as you get more familiar if you're not already familiar, is that messages come across with different roles. And based off that role, that determines who's sending the message. So you can have a role for the user. So this is when you would send the message, or maybe the application sent the message on your behalf. And then the tool would be if there's a response when a tool is completed. So um, that's kind of a response from the application, maybe back to the LLM. Um, and I'm saying here that the tool execution is complete. And then the other option is when it's coming from the assistant. Basically, I'm saying everything else. So here I'm just taking that content and checking to see if it's not nil. And if it's not, I run it through a markdown parser. So the content that comes from the LLM is in markdown. So I have let's see. I have a helper method. Let me pull that up. I guess I don't have that open. I have a helper method for Markdown, and this uses red carpet, so you'll need to install the red carpet gem. But it just takes some options and it just outputs the HTML for that Markdown. So that's all that does. But that is something you need. Otherwise, you'll have a lot of asterisks and weird underscores and other things that may look kind of messy, and everything's going to be in a single paragraph versus having line returns. And then here is where I return the tool status message. So this will be blank a lot of the time. Um, so I'm kind of, if it is a tool message or a tool response, it's actually going to have content here from that method that we set up in the background job to parse that out, just so that it's, what's happening. So in this implementation that we have, we're not streaming anything. We're just kind of responding every time a tool is called or whenever we get a response. So that's maybe not the best user experience, but we'll, rather than dealing with the streaming and everything, this is probably the easiest implementation just at the very get-go. All right. So that is how everything works. So to reiterate what we have is we have an interface that's just rendered as a partial. We have an input form that passes a remote submission. So like, tell me about the homestead project. So you can submit to it. It shows your submissions. It queries the project. It's telling that the execution is complete. So it can do multiple tool calls to get the information that it needs. So that's really interesting that it can do that. So it knows that I need this information to get this other piece. So it will just iterate through it and then give you the response. Here it's actually pulling in the scope statement for that project and saying what the financial impacts are. So that's that. So you have an interface. It can post to the controller. The controller will then start the background job. It will then send a turbo stream back, clearing out the form down here. And then as each of these messages are received through here, it will do a function. Now I could add records to the database at this time, and then use a method, use like the model based, streaming, put the streaming in the model and then have it stream to an interface for that user. That's another way of doing it. But this is like, there's no database backend. This is maybe as simple as you can get. Um, so yeah, so I'm really excited about all this. So it's really exciting to be where we're at today, where we can use these large language models, integrate them into our apps, integrate them into the web, have them help the users simplify the processes. So I'm excited to see what we can do, or what's done in the future as far as automation and user assistance, and making everything easier for people. Um, and making applications that wouldn't not have been feasible in the past, or just wouldn't have been realistic to try to, just due to complexity. So we can add a lot more complexity and simplify it at the same time. So anyways, I appreciate you watching this video. I'll post a link to a document that has this whole process written up. Um, there's just so much to cover. So the next video that I'll do is I'll actually do this live in the posts, or like Hello World, like post styled blog type app, so you can see it. But before that, I felt like it was really important to show kind of how it flows together, so going in what we're doing, because it's going to be a long process. So anyways, I appreciate you guys, and hopefully you enjoyed and you found this video useful. If you did, like, maybe subscribe. I'll probably do more content. I'm just doing this as I go through it, and maybe help other people out there, which hopefully that's cool. So I appreciate it. Thank you.